So this next section deals with the arrival in Abu Dhabi, which was an attempt to earn petrodollars as a consultant for the Center for British Teachers in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates, 2009. Well, yes, we arrived. And in fact, yes, it was bloody freezing in the desert in the mornings in Madinat Zayed, which I'll refer to as MZ for brevity thenceforth. And there were pea soup fogs most days. So Madinat Zayed was outside, Abu Dhabi, in the desert, a good 2 hours away. Can you believe it, though? The pea soup fogs in the middle of the desert. Well, most mornings I was woken up at 5:30 by the imam in the mosque calling everyone to prayer. Calling? Well, more like bellowing. A bit like a cow demanding to be milked. Allahu Akbar. He wailed. Although the mosque was 100 meters away, his voice was actually relayed through a loudspeaker to within about 10 meters of every house in the block, including the one where I was staying. There was no escaping it. This was the signal to pull myself out of my bed, put my feet on the freezing bare stone floor, and skip to the immersion heater like a wallaby in the pitch dark. This heated up the water in the shower by about 6 o'clock. The bedroom of the home of Eddie the horse, my boss, was matless, rugless, carpetless, lightless, and tableless. In fact, it was curtainless and almost entirely furnitureless, apart from the bed itself. As it turned out, the room had been rather hastily arranged. But more of that later. I mustn't get ahead of myself. But yes, there was a thick, dense fog on those freezing early mornings in the dark. It was the 4th, back to my arrival now in Abu Dhabi, it was the 4th of January 2009, and the journey from Adelaide was marked by the first panic attack about 15 minutes into the air. Because of family commitments in Adelaide, I had not yet really started to think about where I was going. On reflection, I think it was probably more than just family commitments in Adelaide. I was really apprehensive about the whole project. That was another reason I hadn't thought about my destination, Madinat Zayed. Madinat Zayed, I mused to myself. Was it a little town or a village? Perhaps 2 hours into the desert, into the empty quarter of Arabia, close to the Saudi border. One supermarket. Google Earth didn't show much else. I thought to myself, perhaps naturally following my train of thought, what will my apartment be like? At interview, they'd said it would be a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment, and furnished, of course. Sounded nice. Thinking about it a bit more, I thought, well, how and when will I be able to get out of this place? Will I buy a car or rent one? Then it struck me, where is my international driving license? Well, HQ in Abu Dhabi had told me to bring one, and I'd gone to some trouble to get one in Brunei, as I knew the UAE would not accept a Bruneian license. Ah, yes, I reassured myself. It must be in my hand luggage with all my other important papers. It must be there. I tried to remember when I had last seen it. I was pretty sure I'd seen it in Adelaide. So I spent the next 7 hours to Kuala Lumpur worrying about it. But when I came to think about it, I really couldn't remember when I'd last seen the damn thing. Was it in Brunei or in Adelaide? Disembarking in transit at KL, I frantically emptied out the contents of my hand luggage onto a table in the airport lounge to a rather bemused audience of other passengers. I searched in vain. The license was nowhere to be found. That was going to be a problem. I arrived into Dubai in the middle of the night, feeling slightly nostalgic about it all, because I could remember vividly my arrival in Dubai 20 years ago. The Dubai of the late 80s was a fine place to live, a mixture of the old and the new. Dubai was expanding, but still manageable in size in those days. I joined the queue for a visitor's visa, as instructed in my mobilization pack, quote unquote, sent electronically from HQ Abu Dhabi months ago to me when I was still in Brunei. I hadn't heard much from HQ since I'd received the mobilization pack. Come to think of it, I hadn't heard anything from HQ in months. I thought to myself, am I really in the right queue here? I soon found out. You come UAE work or just visit? Drawled the dashing but unsmiling Arab slave master who seemed little older than a schoolboy to me. This immigration official seemed weary after processing 50 or 60 Africans in front of me in the queue. The scene was like a set from the Pirates of the Caribbean, with the sound on mute. There were queues everywhere with people of every shape, color, and size imaginable. But this was remarkable under the circumstances. They were very quiet and orderly. No, on reflection, maybe it was more like a train platform at a station leading to one of the concentration camps where Mengele would make his selections. I didn't like the atmosphere at all. Um, I said, I come here work, but company tell me first enter visit visa. He scrutinized me more closely. You come work or visit? I doing both. You go that one. He interrupted and waved me away with his hand to the work visa counter. Amazingly, this was the only part of the airport where there was no queue. And even more amazingly, there was indeed a work visa waiting for me. Well done, HQ. Credit where credit is due. But they might have told me to pick it up, the visa, at the airport, so I didn't have to face the Mengele selections. First, stuff up from HQ. Outside, I was met by an Indian taxi driver with a placard with my name misspelt on it as Mr. Dixon. Hello, he said, shaking his head as if he was unhappy. Mr. Dixon, you go Abu Dhabi. Yes, I said, going Abu Dhabi, and hoping to please him. You play cricket? No, he said. Oh, India good cricket, I insisted. I was deflated. He was not interested in cricket. I foresaw a boring drive ahead to Abu Dhabi. Why arrive in Dubai and not Abu Dhabi? Good question. MZ was on the other side of Abu Dhabi and nowhere near Dubai. In fact, You had to go through Abu Dhabi to get to MZ, a 3 hour journey from Dubai airport to get to MZ. This was probably because it suited HQ for some reason, or more likely, for no reason at all. Second stuff up by HQ. It certainly didn't suit me because my taxi driver wasn't interested in cricket and we didn't have much to say. He did point out various landmarks dimly visible on the right side driving to Abu Dhabi. This one biggest in the world, he pointed enthusiastically at a slim black pinnacle above us, as if he had designed it personally and been the guest of honor cutting the tape at the opening ceremony. The nighttime urban landscape of Dubai passed by and somehow reminded me of that place where the orcs lived in Mordor in Lord of the Rings. But my taxi driver liked it. "Oh yes, thank you, very big one." We smiled happily together, pretending to be happy. We were easily pleased in that dark night. I thought to myself, size really does matter. He was so excited, he could have been talking about his penis. Why are human beings always so impressed by size? We continued on in silence, mostly because he wasn't interested in cricket. The journey became duller as we left Mordor and headed into the open desert. I returned to my thoughts about my driving license. Where the hell could it be? At one point, we turned into a petrol station and stopped, but not at the petrol pump for some reason. It was surprising for a taxi to go to a petrol station in the first place. I was puzzled. The driver leaned over and said, "Only 5 minutes, private thing." "Oh, no problem," I lied. I was puzzled, even alarmed. What could he mean? He didn't go into the petrol station. He went around it and disappeared behind it into the desert. Was he taking a pee? Why didn't he go inside like everyone else? Was he meeting someone? Girlfriend? If so, was the girlfriend for him or for me? Maybe he had picked up the wrong person. Maybe there was a Mr. Dixon. A drug deal, perhaps? A robbery? Kidnapping? People smuggling racket? A people smuggling racket. I got out of the car and peered around the corner of the petrol station. Everything else seemed normal. People were coming in and out of the petrol station. I felt reassured. 15 minutes passed. Well, where the hell was he? My taxi driver. It was bloody cold when I got back into the car. I didn't want to spend the first week of my new experience sniffling and snortling with a cold. Eventually he appeared beside me, shaking his head, waving it from side to side in apology. "Oh, sorry, sir," said the smiling driver. "I eat bad restaurant last night. Very sorry." For the remainder of the journey, we didn't say much. Jet lagged, I was in somber mood, and he didn't like cricket. I checked into the hotel in the middle of the night and immediately broke my New Year's resolution not to fight with petty officials and bureaucrats. A brief altercation with a stroppy East European receptionist ensued, who tried to make me pay $400 for the night. She deserved it. "Now you pay 1,000 dirham," she said with the inappropriate falling intonation which made her sound like an SS guard. Jet-lagged as I was, and licenseless. I was not going to be intimidated. No way, I retorted. Company already pay la, with my Malay colloquial use of la. I was a little confused. I was still mentally in Borneo, obviously, but not confused enough to give in to this rude little hussy half my age. She should have shown me some respect. I was a consultant now, after all, not a bloody teacher. There then followed a discussion behind the reception area, and the boss came out and booked me in. They claimed they hadn't been expecting me. Third stuff up by HQ. The room was lovely, and I immediately searched through all my things for my international driving license. The more I looked, the more I realized there were other things missing too, mostly papers of no use to anyone but me, such as the original of my medical examination and my police clearance certificate, and where the hell were they? It was a mystery that I was never to solve. Next morning, I had breakfast. Really good. Obsequious slave workers from India, Sri Lanka, and the Philippines attended to my every whim, and they were all scared shitless of me. I began to feel comfortable again. Yes, after all, this was the life, and I deserved it. I was an educational consultant. After breakfast, I tried to catch a taxi to HQ for my 9 o'clock induction meeting. Surprisingly, this turned out to be a problem. It was damn nigh impossible to get a taxi in Abu Dhabi, even from this lovely hotel. There were limousines available, but they were very expensive. Anyway, I eventually made it to HQ in a regular taxi after managing to get all the security and ancillary staff at the hotel onto the case. I was a few minutes late and introduced myself in a rush at reception to a very pleasant, but as it turned out, totally inefficient Egyptian girl. HQ were not quite ready for me, so I had to wait for 10 minutes, during which time I somehow managed to crack my head on a slanting wall in the seating area. Unfortunate, maybe, and definitely unusual to do it twice within 2 minutes. After the first knock, the Egyptian lady didn't know whether to laugh or to send me to hospital. She was both amused and concerned and asked me to sit down again, whereupon I proceeded to do exactly the same thing. This was the third time, and this time I broke the skin on my skull, causing quite a bruise to rise on my head, and blood was flowing. I was spotted by people entering and leaving the building, and I was clutching my head. By now, I seemed to be well known at HQ. The rumor had spread quickly that there was a semi-concussed Irishman holding his head in the reception area. Things were not going to plan. I made light of it all. Well, what else could I do? But my head hurt like hell. Most of the Anglo-Saxon mandarins ignored me. But one Indian driver noticed I was in pain, and soon all the Indian drivers poured out of the kitchen in sympathy and urged me, after a careful inspection of my head, to go to the hospital. But I wasn't going to do that, at least not before I had met the head of HR for my orientation. By the time she arrived, the whole office seemed to be talking about the dramatic circumstances surrounding my arrival in the building. Someone from HR, uh, really only about half my age, Jackie, waffled on about policies and procedures. I wasn't paying too much attention. I was fingering my bruise. After a polite pause, I proceeded to announce to her that I had lost my international license, my original medical certificate, and my police clearance certificate on the journey. To my surprise, and I was a little nonplussed, she seemed completely unconcerned about any of these things. I asked myself, if they weren't so important, then why had I busted my ass trying to get them all in Brunei in the first place? Anyway, I suppose she had her own driving license, so what did she care? Anyway, Jackie droned on in HR, reading out what was obviously a PowerPoint presentation without the projector. She seemed interested in talking to me about the various ways in which the company could sack me in the next few months, or, also about performance management, as she euphemistically referred to it. Curiously, performance management seemed to involve traffic lights. Yes, it took me some time to work out the connection between traffic lights and performance management, but in the end I got it. Probation lasted 6 months and you could be sacked without any reason during this period. After probation, you were assessed every 6 months. Green was okay, amber was a warning sign, and red was danger, hence the traffic lights. I was fascinated by it all because Jackie was, like everyone else, half my age, and like most of them at HQ, straight out of UK with little or no experience of living overseas as far as I could see. I was also fascinated because I knew there was no need for the traffic lights. Everyone knows that overseas the contract means nothing at all. Are you going to sue your employer? Well, if the Sheikh or one of his downline lackeys, including Jackie, wanted to get rid of me, all they had to do was say the word. She knew it. So did I. Or maybe Jackie didn't know it. Yet. So who was inducting who then? Anyway, as she finished her spiel on traffic lights, I scratched my head again, wondering if I had some mild concussion from the second knock. I continued to make self-deprecating jokes to Jackie and anyone else who would listen to my misfortunes. I tried to be funny so people would forget me at HQ, or at least remember me for the right reasons. I learned this at school when I was a teenager in the sixth form and unable to compete with the rugby players or Oxbridge candidates for kudos. I could avoid criticism and get kudos by making people laugh. I've been doing it ever since, but it is so exhausting sometimes. Seeing my eyes glaze over with jet lag and concussion, I think Jackie eventually lost interest and told me to go and have a coffee before I met the next person in the orientation team. Excuse me, Simon. Now, Simon was one of those straight up English blokes who was the salt of the earth. He talked straight to you in a heavy northern accent that reassured those who needed reassuring. He was the sort of bloke who you would like to read a bedtime story to your grandchild, or who would have done well convincing people to take off their clothes to have a shower before they went into the gas chamber. Simon was personable, appallingly incompetent, but above all else, plausible. "Hullo," he said. "I'm Simon. I'm from Hull, the Assets and Facilities Manager. Of course, you do know that we have a problem with accommodation in MZ, don't you, Dom?" No, actually, I don't," I said, But I suppose it's not the worst thing that could happen. I lied desperately. Why did I lie? Why did I say that? What's the problem? I inquired, politely feigning disinterest and concealing sheer panic. Uh, Simon paused and bowed his head. In retrospect, I often wondered whether it was in shame or just to gather himself for what was to come. Probably both. Who interviewed you, Donald? I felt a pang of dislike rise in me because I didn't like being called Donald. I much preferred the less formal Don. Uh, Actually, Simon and Ronald and yourself, I think. To be fair, it was 6 months ago on the phone from Brunei. Silence. Okay, Donald, here's what we're going to ask you to do. We're going to ask you to share an apartment in MZ with a compatriot of yours called Eamon. The fact that Eamon was also Irish was apparently supposed to reassure me, and I suppose him as well. Simon, being English, probably didn't realize that Eamon probably kicked with the other foot. I gulped and smiled and said, yes, and yes, said Simon, shuffling some papers in her rudimentary displacement activity. Your R is in there at the moment as well. I thought I was beginning to get the picture now. A 3-bedroomed apartment for 3 grown men over 50 years of age who'd never met each other. Don't worry, said S. It's all kitted out with what you need, beds, etc. For some reason, I wasn't entirely reassured. But before I could ask anything, Simon went on. Now, Donald, Simon said, I have to tell you that if something goes wrong with the apartment, don't put an hole in the bloody wall, or you'll have to pay for it. You'll have to get approval to do things like that. Oh, yes, of course, I said. Simon seemed satisfied with this, and the induction was now over. Now, all you need to do is get your get your AIDS blood test in Central Hospital so you can get your residency visa. And then you can go to MZ tomorrow. Oh, good, I said. And then Jackie came over and said, there's a list of hospitals to go to have the AIDS test. Grabbing the moment, I said, Jackie, I'm a bit concerned about my driving license. Oh, she said, the international license is no good anyway after you get your residency visa. I was stunned. This was surely not true. My mobilization instructions had said nothing about this. I started to feel apprehensive, but before I could reply, she was talking about the AIDS test again. They're changing the rules, I think, she said. Now only government hospitals can do the AIDS test, not private hospitals. Okay, Dom, said Simon. Best you go off to the Central Hospital. Then immediately. I knew the Central Hospital was a government hospital, but I didn't say anything. When I arrived there, it was like the MCG on the final day of an Ashes test. 1 o'clock, and they had stopped serving tickets. Because of the new regulations, all new arrivals to the UAE had to go to the government hospitals, as the private hospitals were deemed to be too corrupt to issue certificates. I came back to HQ and told Simon. Simon hung his head and thought for a moment. Well, he said, what you can do is get up early tomorrow, 5 a.m., go to the hospital and wait till it opens at 8. That way you will only have to queue for 3 hours. At that moment, I think I gawped at Simon like one of those deep sea fish. Someone interrupted the conversation. I'd managed to pick up someone from someone else in the 3 hours I'd been at HQ that there was indeed a government hospital at MZ. I decided Simon was a bullshitter. Maybe I could do the AIDS test in MZ, Simon. No, there's no government hospital in MZ. Oh, I said. 10 minutes later, Simon had been persuaded by someone other than myself that there was indeed a government hospital in MZ. Okay, so noon tomorrow, Don. Someone will pick you up at the hotel and take you to MZ. You can do blood test there. Okay, fine, I said. I was desperate to get away from Simon and HQ to the hotel in order to watch the cricket. I needed something familiar to reassure me, but I'd forgotten about orientation by the admin department. I needn't have worried. When I got back from the hospital, there was a pamphlet entitled Handbook of Policies and Procedures for New Arrival to CFPT Employees. It had been left sitting on top of my laptop. The trip to the hospital had meant I'd missed this particular part of my orientation. It was 1 o'clock and time for my IT induction session. I was starving and hadn't eaten since 8 in the morning. Setting aside my hunger pangs, I entered the IT room to see a guy rise and cut me off with, "Very pleased to meet you, Mr. Don. Please don't worry about your laptop. I will send it to you tomorrow in MZ. Something about him made me think that I wouldn't see my laptop for 2 weeks. I didn't see my work laptop for 2 weeks. Oh, no worries, thanks, I said, as he sauntered off for his lunch. I wore my Aussie hat and was determined to be like an Aussie, unruffled by anything. I understood my orientation by CFPT now to be complete and went back to watch the cricket. The Aussies were losing, but it didn't matter. I was happy. The next day, my adventures really began.